What if history is not a straight line, but a circle quietly closing? Picture a clay tablet still warm from the Mesopotamian sun, its symbols pressed by hands that believed someone someday would read them again. Tonight, traveller, you're not here by chance. You are listening at the same moment ancient patterns begin to whisper once more. What if the Sumerians were not inventing gods, but documenting encounters? Records carved over 5,000 years ago among the earliest writing humanity ever produced describing beings who descended, taught, ruled, and left. Scientific archaeology calls them myths, yet the details remain precise, consistent, and strangely technical. A memory preserved like a signal buried in time, a warning written to survive floods, empires, and silence. Let's drift a little deeper. A single clay tablet rests beneath layers of sand, its surface scarred by time, yet still holding the pressure of a human hand that pressed meaning into wet earth thousands of years ago. It is easy to forget that writing did not begin as art or philosophy, but as necessity. Someone needed to remember something. Someone feared that what they knew might not survive floods, fires, or the slow erosion of cities into dust. Tonight, traveller, imagine that tablet not as an artifact, but as a message deliberately aimed across time, waiting for a moment when the future would finally be able to listen. You are not here by accident. There is a strange feeling that comes when ancient questions resurface at the exact moment modern instruments begin to measure things our ancestors could only describe. I have felt it many nights sitting alone in quiet rooms lit by monitors and old desk lamps, maps of vanished rivers spread across the table, dust gathering at the edges. Outside, the sky moves with such patience that it feels indifferent. Inside, the sense grows that human history is thinner than we like to admit, a recent layer laid gently over something far older and far deeper. The Sumerians appear suddenly in the archaeological record already knowing too much. Writing arrives without hesitation. Astronomy appears with confidence. Law, mathematics, urban planning and kingship emerge as if the instructions had already been written elsewhere. There is no long trail of trial and error preserved in the ground, no centuries of fumbling experimentation. Civilization does not stumble into existence. It stands upright, already looking upward. Modern explanations speak of missing sites of gradual development not yet discovered, and perhaps that is partly true. But the Sumerians themselves gave a different explanation, and they repeated it with unsettling consistency. In their texts, the Anunnaki are not distant or abstract gods. They are present. They arrive. They assign roles. They argue, decide, and depart. They promise to return. The language used to describe them is administrative, not symbolic. These beings descend and ascend. They issue decrees. They establish order. This is not the tone of metaphor. It is the tone of record-keeping of scribes trained to preserve accuracy rather than inspiration. When something mattered, they copied it again and again, knowing that clay once baked remembers longer than flesh. Gravity itself is a form of memory. Objects fall the way they have fallen before following paths shaped by ancient pulls. In the same way, civilizations seem drawn back towards certain patterns. The Sumerians understood cycles not only of kingship and flood, but of the sky itself. They tracked planetary movements with care that goes far beyond agricultural necessity. They watched not simply to predict seasons, but to mark time on a scale that dwarfs human life. Their attention to the heavens feels less like curiosity and more like vigilance. Astronomy for them was not separate from history. It was history written in motion. The slow wobble of Earth's axis, the precession of the equinoxes unfolds over nearly 26,000 years, a duration far longer than any single civilization could observe directly. And yet this cycle appears embedded in their calculations and myths. They divided time into vast ages, each governed by different powers, each marked by transitions that brought upheaval and change. To them, the sky was not a backdrop. It was a clock counting down toward something. I have watched these same movements through modern simulations, seeing how star positions drift imperceptibly from one generation to the next. Light arriving from distant points carries information older than any human structure. Radiation whispers long after its source is gone. When the Sumerians spoke of the heavens, they spoke as if something up there mattered deeply to what happened down here. as if the return or absence of certain beings was written into the mechanics of the cosmos itself. Their creation stories reflect this same unsettling practicality. Humans are not spoken into existence through poetry alone. They are fashioned, adjusted, limited. Intelligence is introduced deliberately mixed with restraint. Mortality is not a curse but a design parameter. These texts describe process correction and intent. They read less like spiritual allegory and more like early attempts to explain something witnessed but not fully understood. Without language for genetics or engineering, the scribes used the words they had blood, clay, mixing, shaping. This is uncomfortable for modern readers because it blurs the line between myth and documentation. We are trained to separate science from story, fact from metaphor, but ancient minds did not divide reality so cleanly. If something happened, they recorded it using every tool available: ritual, symbol, narrative, and list. When later generations inherited these records, they preserved them, not because they understood them fully, but because they sensed importance embedded within them. Across Mesopotamia, temples rose not as gathering halls for worship, but as structured interfaces, elevated platforms oriented precisely to the cardinal directions, summit chambers kept furnished for centuries even when no one arrived, beds made, tables set, supplies renewed. This was not symbolic hospitality, it was maintenance, as if the absence was temporary, as if preparation mattered even when hope grew thin. Erosion is time thinking. It smooths sharp edges but leaves patterns behind. Ziggurats eroded cities, collapsed, languages changed, but the instructions persisted. Watch the sky, keep the records, preserve the protocols, be ready. The tone is never joyful, it is sober. The Anunnaki are not portrayed as saviours returning to rescue humanity, but as administrators who will evaluate what has been done in their absence. Judgment here is not moral, it is procedural. I remember standing once before dawn at an excavation site long since abandoned, the air cool and still the horizon just beginning to pale. For a moment everything felt suspended between epochs, as if the ground itself remembered other feet, other arrivals. Perhaps this is what the Sumerians felt living in the long quiet after departure. Not fear, not devotion, but responsibility. They were caretakers of something incomplete, guardians of knowledge meant to outlast them. Some mysteries are not meant to be solved quickly, they are meant to be carried. Silence is the universe thinking, and humanity has always lived inside that pause, listening, waiting, recording. Whether the Anunnaki were visitors, metaphors, or something that defies our categories entirely, the fact remains that the earliest civilization on Earth believed itself to be part of a larger cycle, one that did not end with them. Tonight as you listen, you join that same chain of witnesses. You look up at the same stars, trace the same slow movements, and feel the same smallness beneath something vast and patient. In the end, traveller, it is all right to not understand. Some mysteries wait, others watch. Evidence does not arrive as revelation but as residue, quiet traces left behind when events move on. Archaeology is the study of what remains, and in Mesopotamia what remains is overwhelming in its precision. Clay tablets catalogue grain deliveries, labour quotas, astronomical observations, legal disputes and genealogies with a consistency that resists fantasy. These were administrative societies, meticulous and methodical, not cultures prone to uncontrolled myth-making. When the same names, roles and hierarchies appear across cities, centuries and dynasties, repetition itself becomes evidence. Patterns that survive collapse suggest intention, not coincidence. Traveller, we sit with those residues, letting them speak. The Anunnaki appear not in isolated myths, but embedded within these records like annotations in a ledger. They are assigned domains, territories and responsibilities just as human officials were. Enki oversees knowledge and water, Enlil commands authority and atmosphere, Anu presides over order itself. This structured division mirrors bureaucratic systems rather than poetic imagination. Scribes list offerings provided, schedules maintained, and protocols followed when these beings arrived. The language of descent and ascent is spatial, directional, practical. Such wording matters because metaphor drifts, but administration anchors. Long nights spent reading these texts reveal a mindset concerned with continuity, compliance, and record. Not wonder, not worship, only procedure, memory, and readiness. Observer. This is how systems speak. Cylinder seals deepen this impression. Carved with careful repetition, they served as signatures pressed into clay to authorize transactions. Their imagery is standardized, not expressive. Symbols repeat with discipline across centuries, cities, and political change. Enki's flowing waters, Inanna's 8-pointed star, Shamash's radiating disk. These are identifiers, not decorations. When the same iconography appears thousands of times, deviation would have mattered. Consistency implies enforcement tradition and shared understanding. Some seals depict objects that resist symbolic comfort. Helmets, tubes, apparatuses carved with functional clarity. Scholars debate endlessly, yet the question remains, why depict fantasy with engineering detail? Evidence accumulates quietly, patiently. Astronomy strengthens the pattern. The Sumerians did not merely name stars, they measured them. The Malapin tablets record rising, setting, solstices, and planetary cycles with accuracy confirmed millennia later. Such precision requires sustained observation across generations. Precession. The slow wobble of Earth's axis unfolds over nearly 26,000 years. No single culture should know it. Yet its imprint appears embedded within Sumerian cosmology. Long cycles mattered. They tracked them not as abstractions, but as clocks. The sky functioned as memory-preserving timing beyond lifetimes. I have watched these same motions through modern instruments, feeling the same weight of duration. The absence of precursor stages troubles researchers. Cities appear planned, writing standardized calendars aligned. This suddenness invites rational explanation, yet the tablets propose another. Knowledge was transferred. Humans were taught. The texts state this plainly without drama. Instruction flowed from the Anunnaki, particularly Enki, who distributes skills like tools. Metalworking, building, administration, law. These are not blessings but systems. As a scientist, I'm wary of certainty. But as a reader, I notice how these claims are made. No persuasion, no justification, only record. When a culture repeats the same explanation for centuries, doubt shifts direction. Evidence does not shout. Foundation deposits reveal intent. Beneath temples and palaces, scribes buried texts meant to survive. Copper cylinders sealed tablets, carefully chosen contents. These were messages, not decorations. Astronomical tables, king lists, ritual procedures preserved for distant readers. I imagine the decision-making what must endure. What knowledge matters after collapse? They chose timing cycles, warnings, not hymns, not praise. The deposits speak of foresight, of awareness that civilizations fail. Dust gathers on everything. Only certain information deserves burial. As erosion thought, these tablets waited. When unearthed, they did not explain. They reminded. Listener evidence sometimes whispers by surviving, not convincing. Silence remains. Skepticism remains necessary. Modern scholarship rejects careless translation and imposed narratives. Precision matters. Evidence must be weighed, not wished into meaning. Yet rejection should not become blindness. There is a difference between saying something is unproven and declaring it impossible. The Sumerians themselves acknowledged gaps, broken tablets, lost originals. They marked uncertainty openly. This humility strengthens, not weakens their testimony. They knew the record was incomplete. Still they preserved what they had, trusting continuity. As someone immersed in data, I respect this honesty. Evidence does not demand belief. It asks attention, observation before conclusion, patience before verdict, the night. Taken together, these strands form a texture, not a conclusion. Evidence accumulates like sediment, layer upon layer, shaped by time. The Anunnaki may represent visitors' metaphors or something beyond categories we use. The point is not certainty, but persistence. The Sumerians believed enough to watch record and wait. Their world ended repeatedly, yet the pattern survived. Somewhere beyond our reach, something ancient still moves, or at least the idea of it does. As you listen, traveller, let the evidence rest. It does not rush. Neither should we. In the end, it's all right to not understand. Some mysteries watch. Long nights in laboratories teach restraint. Instruments hum, screens glow, and data arrives indifferent to desire. I have learned that patterns reveal themselves only when allowed time. The ancient observers knew this too. They trained priests to watch the sky for lifetimes, accepting that results might benefit only descendants. Such patience feels foreign now, yet it shaped their records. Evidence gathered slowly, deliberately, without urgency. When modern readers rush to verdict, we betray the rhythm embedded in the texts. Silence is the universe thinking, and evidence speaks best when we listen. Not to answer, but to align. The night continues. It lays the ground beneath later questions. Evidence here is not proof of return, only of expectation. The Sumerians behaved as if cycles mattered, as if timing would repeat. That belief shaped architecture, astronomy, and memory. Whether the Anunnaki were real beings or narrative vessels, the warning remains intact. Watch the sky, preserve knowledge, prepare without panic. As we drift towards sleep, traveller, let that posture remain, humble, observant, patient. Evidence does not frighten, it invites stillness. The universe whispers again, not to alarm, but to remind. We are listening. Silence holds. Anomalies are not errors in the record. They are places where the record refuses to behave as expected. In science, anomalies are often ignored, at first set aside as noise, waiting quietly until enough of them accumulate to demand attention. In the story of the Sumerians, anomalies appear everywhere, not as isolated curiosities, but as persistent disturbances in an otherwise orderly picture of early civilization. Traveller, this is where certainty begins to soften, and where questions grow heavier rather than lighter. The first anomaly is timing. Civilization in southern Mesopotamia does not emerge gradually in the way most human developments do. Writing astronomy lore and monumental architecture appear in a compressed window, already sophisticated, already standardized. There is no clear experimental phase preserved in the soil. The earliest cuneiform tablets are not crude guesses at communication, they are functional systems. The earliest star lists are not naive sketches, they are structured observations. Archaeology expects hesitation. Instead, it finds confidence. This sudden coherence is not impossible, but it is unusual enough to unsettle comfortable narratives. Another anomaly lies in scale. The Sumerians thought in numbers that far exceeded immediate human concern. They counted time in tens of thousands of years. They described cycles that outlasted dynasties and floods alike. The concept of a period of 600 years recurs in their mathematics, astronomy, and king lists. When reigns of antediluvian kings are added together, the totals align with these cycles precisely. Modern scholars often dismiss these reigns as symbolic exaggeration, yet the mathematical consistency remains. Symbolism rarely obeys arithmetic so cleanly. The anomaly here is not the numbers themselves, but the discipline with which they are used. The sky introduces further disturbance. The Sumerians identified planetary bodies with accuracy confirmed much later by modern astronomy. They tracked the 5 visible planets and associated them consistently with specific deities, not poetically, but systematically. More puzzling are references to celestial phenomena that do not fit neatly into naked eye observation alone. Certain texts describe bodies that cross paths that mark transitions that appear and disappear according to long cycles. Scholars debate whether these are metaphors, observational errors, or misunderstood references. Yet the repetition persists. Anomaly does not vanish when ignored. Precession deepens the unease. The slow wobble of Earth's axis is subtle, nearly invisible within a single lifetime. Detecting it requires either extraordinary patience across many generations or inherited knowledge from an earlier source. The Sumerians incorporated precessional logic into their cosmology, linking ages of time to shifting celestial rulership. They treated these transitions as periods of instability, judgment, and change. This is not astrology in the casual sense. It is chronology anchored in cosmic motion. How such knowledge arrived remains unanswered, and that absence is itself an anomaly. Then there is the problem of intention. The Sumerians did not merely observe anomalies, they responded to them. Temples were designed with precision, aligned to cardinal directions, elevated above cities visible from vast distances. Summit chambers were furnished and maintained for centuries long after no arrivals were recorded. This behaviour defies purely symbolic explanation. Symbolic spaces do not require beds to be made. Linens replaced food accounted for in administrative texts. These details belong to hospitality, not metaphor. Anomaly here is not belief but practice. Cylinder seals introduce visual contradictions. Artistic symbolism typically evolves, varies, and personalizes. Yet Mesopotamian seals remain stubbornly standardized. Certain figures appear with objects that resemble devices more than emblems. Tubes, containers, structured headgear carved with repeating precision. Scholars explain these as stylized regalia, and often that is sufficient. But occasionally the explanation strains. The imagery looks less ceremonial than functional, less mythic than engineered. An anomaly does not prove interpretation, but it resists dismissal. Human origins form perhaps the most unsettling deviation. Creation myths from Mesopotamia describe humanity as engineered, rather than divinely spoken into existence. The language is biological, procedural, iterative. Failures occur, adjustments are made, fertility is controlled. Lifespan is limited deliberately. Intelligence is introduced as a material property derived from divine substance. These descriptions trouble modern readers because they sound uncomfortably technical. Without modern vocabulary, ancient scribes reached for the nearest equivalent's blood clay mixing. The anomaly lies not in believing these accounts literally, but in recognizing how consistently they avoid poetic abstraction. Long nights with duster teach patience with uncertainty. I have watched anomalies accumulate in research fields dismissed for decades, until a new framework allowed them to align. Often the data was never wrong, interpretation was incomplete. The Sumerian record feels similar. Each anomaly alone is manageable. Together they begin to lean towards something unresolved. Not proof, not conclusion, but pressure. Silence itself becomes anomalous. The texts speak of departure, of withdrawal, of gods becoming distant. Over centuries, the tone shifts from presence to absence. Rituals become more elaborate as access becomes more difficult. The effort required to summon attention increases as if something fundamental changed. If the Anunnaki were always symbolic, why does distance matter? Why does absence require explanation? Anomaly appears where expectation fails. Anomalies also exist in what is missing. The Sumerians reference texts that no longer exist, longer works, earlier records, complete accounts lost to fire flood or deliberate removal. They acknowledged gaps, openly noting damaged tablets and missing sections. This transparency suggests awareness of loss. They knew they did not possess the full story. The anomaly is not that knowledge vanished, but that they believed it once existed fully. In science, anomalies are invitations. They ask us to slow down, not to leap. They remind us that certainty often arrives last. The Sumerians lived with anomalies without panic. They recorded them, contextualized them, and built systems around them. Watch the sky, preserve knowledge, maintain readiness. They did not claim to understand everything. Neither should we. Tonight, listener anomalies do not threaten sleep. They soften the edges of certainty, allowing humility to enter. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, only observed. Anomalies mark the places where our frameworks end and something older begins. They are not answers, but openings. In the end, traveller, it is all right to not understand. The anomaly remains. The silence holds. Somewhere beyond our reach, something ancient still moves. Or at least the memory of movement does. Let that be enough for now. Silence is not the absence of information. In science, silence is often where the most important signals hide, buried beneath assumptions waiting for the noise to fade. In the Sumerian record, silence arrives gradually like dusk, not as an abrupt ending, but as a slow withdrawal. Early texts speak with confidence about presence instruction and direct interaction. Later texts do not deny these events. They simply stop describing them as ongoing. Something changes, and the change itself becomes one of the most revealing features of the story. Traveller, this is where the record grows quieter and therefore heavier. In the earliest layers of Mesopotamian writing, the Anunnaki move among humans. They walk, speak, argue, decide. Kings receive authority directly. Cities are founded with divine oversight. The boundary between heaven and earth feels permeable, functional, almost mundane. There is no anxiety about access because access is assumed. But as centuries pass, the tone shifts. The gods do not vanish, yet they retreat. They must be invoked, appeased, summoned through increasingly complex rituals. Silence grows between messages, and that silence requires explanation. Ritual complexity is often interpreted as religious evolution, but it can also be read as compensation. When direct contact fades, procedure expands. When certainty weakens, precision increases. The Sumerians respond to silence not with abandonment, but with maintenance. Temples remain staffed. Offerings continue. Astronomical observations persist night after night. The systems do not collapse when the voices fall quiet. Instead, they are preserved more carefully than ever, as if absence itself demanded discipline. Silence reshapes architecture. Ziggurats remain oriented toward the sky, their summit chamber still furnished, still cleaned, still provisioned. Administrative texts continue to account for bread beer oils and linens assigned to rooms no human sleeps in. This is not symbolic silence. It is practical. Rooms prepared for occupants who do not arrive. Maintenance without feedback. Any modern researcher recognizes this pattern. Systems designed for interaction continue running long after signals stop because shutting them down would admit finality. The silence is treated as temporary. The sky grows more important as voices fade. Astronomical records intensify as if the heavens have become the only remaining interface. The Sumerians watch planetary movements not just to mark seasons but to detect signs. Certain alignments matter more than others. Certain cycles are watched with special care. Silence shifts attention upward. When communication fails locally, distant signals gain weight. Light becomes message. Motion becomes language. The universe itself is treated as an archive that cannot be destroyed. I have felt this same instinct during long, observational campaigns, when instruments return no anomalies for months. Silence becomes data. Absence becomes meaningful. One begins to ask not what is happening, but why nothing is happening now. The Sumerians appear to have lived inside such a question. Their texts do not rage against abandonment. They do not collapse into despair. They wait. Waiting becomes their cultural posture. Silence also enters genealogy. Early kings claim direct descent from gods. Their authority is biological, not symbolic. Over time, this lineage thins. Reigns shorten. Divine ancestry fades from the lists. The texts mark this explicitly. This is not metaphorical decline, it is documented dilution. The silence here is genetic, not vocal. A slow loss of something once present. The scribes do not hide it. They record it carefully as if tracking the fading echo of an origin they no longer fully possess. Language itself reflects withdrawal. Words describing direct divine action become rarer. Dreams, omens, and intermediaries take their place. Communication becomes indirect. Interpretation replaces instruction. Silence forces hermeneutics. Priests become translators rather than hosts. The effort required to extract meaning increases and the certainty of interpretation decreases. This is not merely religious maturation. It is adaptation to absence. Silence enters the myths as well. Stories of departure appear. Departure. Gates are sealed. Heaven and earth separate. The texts never specify dates, never dramatize farewell. They treat withdrawal as a fact, not a tragedy. Something that happened because it had to. Perhaps because a cycle ended. Perhaps because conditions changed. Perhaps because the purpose was fulfilled. Silence does not require explanation when it is expected. Modern scholarship often treats these shifts as internal cultural development, and that may be partially true. But the consistency of the pattern across centuries suggests shared memory rather than gradual forgetting. The Sumerians knew something had changed. They did not know when it would change back. Silence became a condition to manage, not a problem to solve. Foundation deposits grow more deliberate during this quiet phase. Texts are buried not for immediate use but for survival. Messages are addressed to distant readers. Notes appear written for future days. The scribes understood silence would extend beyond their lifetimes. They prepared for readers who would not share their assumptions, who might not know what questions to ask. Silence stretches forward as well as backward. Silence is also restraint. The Sumerians did not attempt to recreate what was lost. They did not build machines to replace gods. They did not claim new revelations. They maintained what they had, watched, recorded, preserved. In a world that often responds to absence with invention, this patience is striking. They accepted that some things could not be forced. Tonight, observer silence is not emptiness, it is interval, a pause between movements. In music, silence gives shape to sound. In physics, vacuum defines structure. In history, silence marks transitions too slow to narrate directly. The Sumerians lived inside such a pause, aware that they were not at the beginning and not at the end. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, only observed. Silence teaches humility. It reminds us that presence is not guaranteed, that knowledge can recede, that connection can thin without disappearing entirely. The universe does not rush to fill every gap, neither should we. As you drift deeper, let the silence of the ancient world surround you, not threatening, not empty, simply vast, a space where questions remain intact without answers pressing down on them. In the end, traveller, it is all right to not understand. Silence is the universe thinking, and tonight it thinks slowly, patiently beneath the same stars that once watched over the first cities of humanity. A forgotten epoch is not erased. It is compressed, folded into fragments that survive without context. History does not disappear cleanly. It thins, scatters and settles into places that later generations mistake for beginnings. In Mesopotamia, the earliest records already look backward, already refer to times before memory was organized into kings and cities. The Sumerians did not believe they were the first. They believed they were late. Traveller, this quiet conviction shapes everything that follows, and it lingers beneath the ruins like a pressure you can feel but not see. The texts speak often of antediluvian times, ages before the flood, when kings ruled, for spans that stretch beyond ordinary human comprehension. Modern readers quickly label these reigns as symbolic exaggerations meant to glorify the past. Yet the scribes themselves were not careless with numbers. They were accountants of reality, trained to record grain labour and law with precision. When they extended time, they did so deliberately. The anomaly is not the length of these reigns, but the consistency with which they are structured. These ages follow patterns, cycles, and ratios that repeat elsewhere in their system of thought. Flood narratives anchor this forgotten epoch, not as singular events, but as resets. The flood is not merely punishment, it is transition, a boundary between phases of the world. The Sumerians describe a time when knowledge existed more fully, when contact was closer, when the boundary between human and divine was thinner. After the flood, something is lost. Lifespans shorten, authority fragments, memory fades. The world becomes heavier, slower, more constrained. This is not nostalgia. It is documentation of change. Geology whispers in agreement. The end of the last ice age brought rapid sea level rise, flooding coastlines and reshaping human habitation. Ancient settlements now lie beneath water, unreachable, unreadable. Rivers changed course, marshlands expanded. The Persian Gulf itself was once a fertile plain, possibly home to early cultures now submerged. A forgotten epoch need not be mythical to be invisible. The earth erases gently, not maliciously. Sediment accumulates. Coastlines retreat. What once was central becomes inaccessible. The Sumerians lived downstream from this loss. Their land was built from silt carried by rivers that remembered older terrains. Perhaps their myths preserved echoes of cultures drowned by rising seas of knowledge centres lost beneath water. When they spoke of a golden age before catastrophe, they may have been reaching toward a real fragmented memory. Forgotten epochs do not survive intact. They survive as distortions refracted through story and ritual. The gods themselves change across this divide. Early Anunnaki are present, administrative, embodied. Later gods are distant, symbolic, invoked rather than encountered. This shift mirrors the transition from remembered experience to inherited tradition. What was once direct becomes mediated. What was once lived becomes narrated. The forgotten epoch is not simply earlier in time, it is closer to source. Later ages orbit it like satellites around a mass they can no longer touch. I have felt this sensation reading stratigraphic reports late at night tracing layers of soil that represent centuries compressed into centimeters. Time is not linear underground. It stacks. Older worlds lie directly beneath newer ones, separated by thin boundaries. A forgotten epoch may be only a few meters down, yet unreachable, without deliberate excavation. In human memory, the distance feels far greater. Once continuity breaks, reconstruction becomes speculation. The Sumerians treated the past with caution rather than reverence. They did not claim to fully understand what came before. They acknowledged loss. They recorded gaps. They named the limits of their knowledge openly. This honesty is striking. Instead of mythologizing the forgotten epoch into perfection, they treated it as powerful but incomplete. Knowledge existed then that does not exist now. Authority was different. The relationship between heaven and earth operated under other conditions. The concept of the me reinforces this idea. These were not vague blessings but discrete capabilities. Kingship, craftsmanship, wisdom, judgment, even emotional states. They could be possessed, transferred, lost. When Inanna steals the me from Enki civilization shifts, cities gain complexity, power redistributes. This reads less like allegory and more like memory of technological or organizational inheritance. The forgotten epoch may have held these systems intact, later distributed unevenly as remnants. Forgotten epochs are often misinterpreted as fantasies because they do not align neatly with surviving evidence. But evidence survival is selective. Fire preserves clay but destroys wood. Water buries stone but erases paper. What remains shapes narrative. The Sumerians understood this vulnerability. That is why they buried texts, deliberately sealed knowledge in foundations, copied ancient records they no longer fully grasped. They were not preserving the past for nostalgia. They were preserving it because it mattered to the future. Silence deepens around the forgotten epoch. The further back one looks, the less detail remains. Names blur, dates vanish. Events condense into archetypes. Yet the emotional weight persists. Loss, transition, withdrawal. The sense that humanity is living in the afterimage of something larger. This feeling is not unique to Sumer. It appears globally in flood myths' lost golden ages, departed teachers. Perhaps these are independent inventions, or perhaps they are parallel memories of shared disruption. As a scientist-poet, I accept uncertainty. Forgotten epochs resist clean explanation. They exist at the edge of archaeology, geology, and myth. They ask us to consider that human history may include chapters we have not yet learned how to read. Not because they are hidden intentionally, but because their mediums did not survive. Stone remembers differently than flesh. Earth remembers differently than language. Tonight, listener, you are not being asked to believe in a specific lost world, only to recognize that forgetting is part of being human, that progress does not always move forward smoothly, that resets happen quietly or catastrophically, and civilizations rebuild using fragments of what came before. The Sumerians believed they were inheritors, not originators. That belief shaped their humility and their vigilance. Some mysteries wait, others watch. The forgotten epoch remains beneath our feet, and behind our words, shaping patterns we still follow without knowing why. In the end, traveller, it is all right to not understand. Forgetting does not mean meaning is gone. It means meaning has not finished speaking. Let that thought settle gently as we move deeper into the night, carrying the weight of ages we can sense but not fully recall. A reset is not an ending. It is a recalibration, a return to baseline conditions when complexity grows unstable. In nature, resets happen quietly and violently alike. Forests burn to release soil. Rivers flood to redraw their boundaries. Ice advances and retreats, erasing paths only to make new ones possible. The Sumerians understood this rhythm intuitively. Their texts do not describe catastrophe as meaningless destruction, but as correction. When balance tips too far, the system responds. Traveller, This idea of reset lies at the core of their worldview, shaping how they understood time civilization and their own fragile place within cycles far larger than themselves. The flood stands as the clearest symbol of reset in Mesopotamian thought, yet it is not treated as a singular moral judgment. It is described as a threshold, a dividing line between epochs. Before the flood, conditions allowed extraordinary longevity, closer contact with the Anunnaki, and direct transmission of knowledge. After it, those conditions no longer existed. Lifespans shortened, authority fragmented, memory weakened. Memory. The reset did not erase humanity, but it altered the parameters under which humanity operated. This distinction matters. Resets preserve continuity while enforcing limitation. Geology supports the plausibility of such transitions. At the end of the last ice age, rapid warming destabilized ecosystems across the globe. Sea levels rose dramatically, swallowing coastlines where early human communities had likely flourished. River systems shifted. Fertile plains vanished beneath water. What survived did so unevenly, leaving pockets of memory disconnected from their original contexts. Civilization did not begin from nothing, it restarted from fragments. The Sumerians lived in the aftermath of such a reset, rebuilding atop sediments laid down by catastrophe. Their king lists reflect this awareness. Antediluvian kings rule for immense spans of time, followed by a sudden break. After the flood reigns shortened drastically, becoming increasingly human in scale. The scribes did not smooth this transition. They marked it sharply, as if insisting the reset be remembered. This is not myth trying to impress. It is chronology insisting on rupture. Something fundamental changed, and they refused to pretend otherwise. Resets also appear in celestial terms. The Sumerians tracked long astronomical cycles that repeat regardless of human affairs. Precession, planetary alignments, and age transitions function as cosmic resets, shifting the background conditions against which life unfolds. They believed certain eras allowed closer interaction between heaven and earth, while others imposed distance. These were not rewards or punishments, but phases. When the sky changed, the rules changed. Humanity adapted or suffered the consequences. I have watched data series reset unexpectedly and experiments forcing recalibration. Instruments drift, conditions shift. When thresholds are crossed, models fail until adjusted. The Sumerian worldview feels similar. They did not assume permanence. They expected change. They anticipated that what worked once might not work again under new conditions. This expectation produced resilience rather than despair. Systems were built to survive interruption, not to guarantee continuity. Temple architecture embodies this mindset. Ziggurats were rebuilt repeatedly atop earlier foundations, rising layer by layer as cities reset themselves after floods or destruction. Each rebuilding preserved orientation, function, and ritual purpose. Even when materials changed, intent remained. The reset was acknowledged without abandoning structure. This balance between adaptation and preservation allowed civilization to persist through instability. The Anunnaki themselves participate in resets. They arrive, teach rule, and depart. Their withdrawal is not framed as abandonment, but as phase completion. Some texts suggest conflict among the gods necessitated departure. Others imply environmental conditions changed. Still others frame departure as planned temporary cyclical. Regardless, humanity is left with instructions rather than guardians. The reset transfers responsibility. Humans must maintain systems without direct oversight. This transfer is uncomfortable. It forces maturity. The Sumerians seem acutely aware of this burden. Their obsession with record-keeping ritual and astronomy reflects anxiety about forgetting during the reset period. Knowledge lost during transitions may never be recovered. That fear drives preservation. Foundation deposits, copied tablets, and sealed instructions are acts of resistance against erasure. Resets may be an inevitable, but total amnesia is not. Resets also reshape identity. Before the flood, humans are closer to gods. After they become fully mortal, divine ancestry dilutes. Authority becomes political rather than biological. This shift is not celebrated but accepted. Humanity learns to exist without direct divine presence. Ritual replaces interaction. Interpretation replaces instruction. The reset forces humans to interpret signs rather than receive commands. This is a quieter form of intelligence, less certain, more fragile. Modern civilization stands at its own thresholds. Climate shifts, technological acceleration, and ecological strain suggest parameters are changing again. Reading Sumerian texts in this context feels unsettling. Their warnings are not apocalyptic predictions, but reminders. Systems reset when limits are exceeded. Complexity carries risk. Memory matters most when continuity breaks. Yet there is comfort in this perspective. Resets are not failures, they are adjustments. Life persists through them, reshaped but not erased. The Sumerians believed cycles repeat not exactly but recognizably. The sky turns, ages shift, conditions return in altered form. What was once possible may become possible again under new alignments. Tonight, listener, the idea of reset need not disturb sleep. It invites humility. It reminds us that we are part of a long sequence of attempts, not a final version. Civilization is an experiment running across millennia, interrupted, resumed, recalibrated. The Sumerians understood this and prepared accordingly. They did not cling to permanence. They watched for signs. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, only observed. Resets resist prediction because they emerge from complexity itself, but awareness softens their impact. The ancient world whispers this lesson. Gently build, preserve, watch, and accept change when it comes. As you drift deeper, imagine the reset not as collapse but as breath. Inhale, exhale, expansion and contraction. The universe moves this way. So do civilizations. In the end, traveller, it is all right to not understand every cycle. You're not lost in space. And tonight the cosmos keeps watch as it always has through every ending that is also a beginning. An echo is not a repetition of the original sound. It is the memory of it altered by distance, softened by interference, shaped by the space it travels through. In the Sumerian record, echoes are everywhere. Not direct voices, not clear instructions, but reverberations of something once present, now reflected through ritual architecture and habit. Traveller. This is where the ancient world no longer speaks directly, but hums beneath the surface of what remains, persistent and impossible to silence completely. After the withdrawal of the Anunnaki, the systems they established did not vanish. They continued operating, slowly transforming as generations passed. Temples still functioned, calendars were still maintained. The sky was still watched with careful attention. These practices were echoes of an earlier condition preserved not because they were fully understood, but because they had once mattered profoundly. When meaning fades, structure often survives longer than explanation. The Sumerians lived within such structures, inheriting forms whose origins lay beyond their reach. Echo appears most clearly in ritual. Early ceremonies describe reception and hosting. Later rituals focus on invocation and appeasement. The actions remain similar, but their intent shifts. What was once practical becomes symbolic. What was once interactive becomes interpretive. Yet the forms are preserved with extraordinary precision, as if deviation itself might break something fragile. Echo demands accuracy, even when understanding is incomplete. Architecture too carries resonance. Ziggurats rise repeatedly across Mesopotamia, rebuilt after floods and destruction, each one aligned with the same cardinal directions, each one ascending toward the sky. Their summit chambers remain private, inaccessible to ordinary worshippers, prepared for presence rather than congregation. Even when no one arrives, the space remains reserved. This persistence suggests memory encoded in stone. Buildings remember their purpose even when people forget why. The echo extends into language. Words describing descent, ascent, and return persist long after those actions cease to occur. The vocabulary remains active, circulating through myths, prayers, and inscriptions. Language carries memory more stubbornly than belief. A word survives even when its referent fades. The Sumerians continued to speak as if return were possible, as if cycles would complete, as if absence were temporary. Echo does not argue, it simply repeats. Astronomy amplifies this effect. The sky becomes the ultimate echo chamber, repeating patterns across vast spans of time. The Sumerians trusted celestial motion because it outlasted political collapse. Stars returned to the same positions. Planets traced familiar paths. Precession shifted the background slowly, predictably. These movements reinforced the idea that cycles do not end, only transition. When human systems fail, cosmic systems continue. The echo of earlier ages remains written in light. I have experienced this sensation studying ancient data sets late at night, tracing patterns recorded by people long gone. Their observations remain valid even when their interpretations no longer align with ours. The data echoes across time, bridging minds that never met. In that moment, the boundary between past and present feels thin. The Sumerians lived with this thinness, daily aware that their actions resonated backward as well as forward. Echo also shapes authority. Kings continue to claim divine sanction long after divine presence fades. This claim becomes symbolic rather than biological, yet it remains central to legitimacy. Power echoes its origin even when the source is gone. The danger of echo is mistaking memory for immediacy. The Sumerians navigated this tension carefully, distinguishing between inherited authority and direct descent in their records. They knew something had changed even as they preserved the form. Cylinder seals serve as miniature echoes. Rolled across clay, they reproduce the same images again and again, transmitting identity and legitimacy through repetition. Each impression is an echo of the carving, which itself echoes an earlier standard. Over centuries, the image remains stable, resisting artistic evolution. This is not creativity, it is fidelity. Echo values consistency over innovation. Myth becomes echo when lived experience ends. Stories of gods walking among humans persist long after such encounters cease. These narratives are retold not as current events but as ancestral memory. They explain why things are the way they are, why access is limited, why rituals exist. Echo fills the explanatory gap left by absence. It comforts without resolving. Silence itself produces echo. When a signal stops, the mind listens harder, amplifying remnants. The Sumerians appear to have listened carefully to what remained after departure. They treated echoes as meaningful, not dismissible. This respect allowed continuity. They did not demand new revelations. They worked with what persisted. In modern terms, echo resembles legacy systems in technology. Old code continues running beneath new interfaces, shaping outcomes invisibly. Removing it would break functionality, even if no one fully understands how it works anymore. The Sumerians lived inside such legacy structures, maintaining them because experience taught that abandonment led to instability. Echo was safer than reinvention. There is humility in accepting echo. It acknowledges loss without pretending recovery. It preserves connection without claiming immediacy. The Sumerians understood that they were living after something not before it. Their task was stewardship, not origin. This perspective tempers ambition. It encourages patience. Tonight, listener, echo surrounds us as well. Languages carry assumptions older than their speakers. Institutions reflect purposes no longer remembered. Technologies embody choices made by people long gone. We live amid echoes, constantly, rarely noticing. The ancient world simply recognized this condition more openly. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, only observed. Echo teaches us to listen without expectation of reply. It asks for attentiveness rather than certainty. When you hear an echo, you know something was there even if it is no longer visible. As you drift deeper into rest, imagine the ancient echoes still moving quietly through stone sky and story. They do not demand belief. They do not insist on meaning. They simply persist. In the end, traveller, it is all right to not understand. Echo does not explain itself. It only reminds us that nothing truly disappears, it only changes the way it speaks. A pattern is not proof. It is an invitation to notice. It does not announce itself loudly or demand belief. It simply repeats quietly, patiently across time and scale, waiting for someone to see that repetition and pause. In the Sumerian world, patterns were not abstract curiosities. They were survival tools. To live in a land shaped by floods, droughts, and celestial rhythms was to learn that nothing important happened only once. The earliest Mesopotamian texts reveal an obsession with order. Lists, tables, ratios, cycles, and correspondences dominate their intellectual output. Kings are listed, reigns are counted, stars are catalogued, days are divided, months interlock. Everything is placed into sequence. This is not aesthetic preference. It is an attempt to map reality as something governed by recurrence rather than randomness. Pattern meant predictability, and predictability meant safety. The Anunnaki narratives fit into this worldview seamlessly. Their arrival is not framed as a singular miracle, but as an event within a larger rhythm. They come, they establish, they rule, they withdraw. The texts never describe this as a final act. Instead, they embed it within cycles of ages' reigns and celestial movements. Departure is not an ending, but a phase. Return is not speculation, but expectation shaped by precedent. Pattern appears first in the sky. The Sumerians divided the heavens into sections long before modern astronomy formalized constellations. These divisions were not arbitrary. They corresponded to seasonal change, agricultural timing, and ritual observance. The sky functioned as a clock large enough to outlast dynasties. When political power collapsed, the stars still rose on schedule. Pattern offered continuity when everything else fractured. Precession complicates this picture further. The slow wobble of Earth's axis shifts stellar positions over thousands of years. No single lifetime can observe its full cycle. Yet the Sumerians encoded this motion into their long count systems. They spoke of great ages measured not in years but in eras defined by celestial alignment. This suggests either extraordinary intergenerational record-keeping or inherited knowledge that predated their civilization. Either way, pattern here exceeds human scale. On Earth, the same logic appears in geology. Flood layers repeat in Mesopotamian soil, separated by centuries, but similar in character. Cities rise are buried, and rise again atop their own ruins. Each rebuilding follows familiar layouts aligned to the same directions, respecting the same sacred points. Pattern guides, reconstruction, memory becomes architecture. The king lists demonstrate pattern with unsettling clarity. Antediluvian rulers reigned for impossibly long spans. Post-flood reigns shorten dramatically. Over generations, lifespans normalize. This is not random inflation. The numbers follow ratios and base systems consistent with Sumerian mathematics. Pattern governs even exaggeration. The scribes were not inventing freely. They were preserving structure. I have felt this same tension when analysing long-term climate data. Individual years fluctuate wildly, but over centuries curves emerge. Noise resolves into signal. Pattern does not eliminate uncertainty. It contextualizes it. The Sumerians approached history in this way, treating events as expressions of deeper rhythms rather than isolated incidents. The Anunnaki themselves are embedded in pattern. Their hierarchy mirrors administrative structures. Their conflicts resemble political disputes. Their interventions align with environmental stressors. When populations grow too large, corrective measures follow. When systems destabilize, resets occur. Flood narratives fit this logic. They are not moral parables alone, but responses to systemic imbalance. Pattern also governs knowledge transfer. The me whatever they were moved between cities according to rule-bound processes. They cannot be taken by force across territorial boundaries. They change hands through ritual negotiation or subterfuge. This implies an underlying legal framework respected even by gods. Pattern constrains power. No actor operates outside it entirely. In human terms, pattern becomes culture. Practices persist because they worked before. Ritual calendars align with agricultural success. Observational astronomy guides irrigation schedules. Over time, cause and effect blur, but the pattern remains. People continue to act because tradition encodes previous solutions. Pattern is memory externalized. There is comfort in this. A patterned universe is not benign, but it is legible. It allows anticipation. It allows preparation. The Sumerians watched the sky not because it was beautiful, but because it was informative. Every repetition was data. Every deviation was warning. Yet pattern also breeds complacency. When cycles repeat too reliably, humans assume continuity. They forget that patterns can shift, stretch or break under new conditions. The Sumerians recorded this risk implicitly. They noted times when signs changed, when omens contradicted expectations, when rituals failed. These moments were unsettling precisely because they violated pattern. Modern science shares this vulnerability. We model systems based on historical data, assuming continuity. Climate change reminds us that patterns can accelerate beyond precedent. The ancient world faced similar disruptions, framed not in carbon metrics but in divine displeasure or cosmic imbalance. Different language, same anxiety. What distinguishes the Sumerians is their willingness to preserve pattern, even when meaning faded. They copied texts they no longer fully understood. They maintained rituals whose original function was obscure. They tracked cycles longer than any empire. This patience suggests humility. They accepted that understanding was partial, but pattern still mattered. Tonight, observer, consider how much of your own life is shaped by patterns you did not choose. Circadian rhythms, seasonal moods, economic cycles, inherited institutions, even sleep follows ancient biological loops. Pattern does not ask permission. It operates quietly, persistently. The Anunnaki narrative, stripped of speculation, is ultimately about pattern recognition. Did something intervene in human development? Possibly. But more importantly, the Sumerians believed that intervention followed rules, cycles, and constraints. That belief shaped their science, religion, and governance. It anchored them in a universe that was structured, not arbitrary. Some mysteries wait, others watch. Pattern does both. It waits to be noticed and it watches for deviation. When something returns, it does so along established paths. When something ends, it leaves traces that guide reconstruction. As you ease towards sleep, let the idea of pattern soften your thoughts. You do not need to solve it. You only need to rest within it. Gravity as memory, light as schedule, time as repetition with variation. In the end, traveller, it's all right to not understand. Pattern does not require comprehension to function. It only requires presence. Tonight the universe whispers again, not with answers, but with rhythm. And rhythm, once felt, carries you gently toward rest. A warning is rarely shouted. It is usually whispered, folded into routine language, hidden inside instructions that seem ordinary until circumstances change. In the Sumerian world, warnings were not dramatic prophecies of doom. They were procedural notes, astronomical correlations, ritual timings, and quiet reminders embedded in texts meant to be copied, not interpreted emotionally. A warning to them was not fear. It was preparation. The surviving tablets suggest that the Anunnaki were associated less with punishment than with evaluation. Their presence coincided with oversight, accounting, and correction. When systems functioned, they withdrew. When systems destabilized, intervention followed. This framing shifts the meaning of warning entirely. It is not about catastrophe arriving suddenly, but about thresholds being crossed unnoticed until response becomes necessary. I've seen similar dynamics in long-term data analysis. Systems tolerate stress for years, even decades, appearing stable, while pressure accumulates invisibly. Then one small variable changes and collapse seems abrupt, even though it was mathematically inevitable. The warning signs were present, but they required patience to recognize. The Sumerians understood this intuitively. Their texts repeatedly emphasize watching the sky, watching omens, watching cycles complete. Not because the heavens controlled fate directly, but because celestial motion was the most reliable indicator of timing. When certain alignments returned, conditions also returned. The same configurations that preceded earlier disruptions were expected to precede future ones. Pattern became forecast. The warnings embedded in these texts are strangely unemotional. There is no panic in their tone, no urgency to convince. Instead, there is repetition. Copy this, preserve that, maintain the rituals, keep the measurements accurate, record deviations carefully. The scribes behaved less like prophets and more like archivists tasked with maintaining an early warning system across generations. Flood narratives illustrate this mindset clearly. The deluge is not framed as divine rage alone, but as an administrative decision made after prior mitigation attempts failed. Plagues, droughts, and famine precede it. Each intervention escalates only after previous measures prove insufficient. The warning phase is prolonged. Humanity is not ignorant of impending danger, it is resistant to adjustment. This pattern mirrors modern environmental risk. Early signals appear are debated, then normalized. Only when thresholds are crossed does response become unavoidable. The Sumerians encoded this progression mythologically, but the structure remains recognizable. Warning precedes correction. Correction precedes reset. The Anunnaki council scenes are particularly revealing. Decisions are debated, votes are counted, dissent exists. Enki repeatedly argues for preservation rather than destruction. The presence of disagreement implies that outcomes were not predetermined. Warnings served as an opportunity for change, not merely a prelude to catastrophe. Yet warnings were often ignored. Not out of malice, but out of inertia. Systems that function adequately resist modification. Humans adapt to gradual change until adaptation itself becomes vulnerability. The Sumerians recorded this tendency with surprising honesty. Their texts do not portray humanity as wicked, only noisy, numerous, and difficult to manage. Warnings also appear in the maintenance of temples and ziggurats. Summit chambers were kept furnished long after visits ceased. Offerings continued, protocols were followed. This was not blind devotion. It was continuity under uncertainty. If return occurred unexpectedly, readiness mattered. Neglect itself was a risk. Astronomical warning signs were treated with similar seriousness. Certain planetary alignments were flagged as unstable periods. Eclipses required ritual response. Comets and unusual stars were documented carefully. Not every anomaly predicted disaster, but every anomaly demanded attention. Ignoring signs was considered negligent, not skeptical. I think often of nights spent calibrating instruments, watching for deviations so slight they could be dismissed as error. Most anomalies mean nothing. A few mean everything. The discipline lies in watching without panic, recording without bias, and responding proportionally. This balance defined Sumerian intellectual culture. Warnings were also personal. Kings were evaluated based on adherence to divine order. When cities fell, inscriptions blamed neglect of protocol more than external enemies. The lesson was consistent. Stability depended on maintenance. Collapse followed neglect, not surprise. The idea of return intensifies this warning framework. If departure was temporary, then absence was not permission to abandon standards. It was a test of autonomy. Humanity was expected to maintain systems without direct oversight. Failure would be assessed upon return. This perspective reframes anxiety. The warning is not that something terrible will happen, but that something will be noticed. Evaluation replaces apocalypse. Accountability replaces annihilation. The fear is not destruction, but judgment based on long-term behavior. Modern readers often project apocalyptic expectations onto these texts, but the originals are more restrained. They suggest continuity through cycles rather than final endings. Resets occur, but life persists. Knowledge is lost, then rediscovered. Warnings are issued, sometimes heeded, sometimes not. The Sumerians buried tablets in foundation deposits precisely because they expected loss. They anticipated collapse and planned for recovery. This is warning at its most constructive. Not alarm, but foresight. Not despair, but resilience. Tonight, listener, consider how warnings function in your own world. Climate models, economic indicators, social tensions. Most are known, debated, and archived. Few prompt immediate change. The ancient pattern persists. Awareness does not guarantee response. Yet the Sumerians believed that recording mattered even if action failed. Knowledge preserved could inform future generations. Warnings unheeded once might be understood later. Time itself became an ally in communication. Somewhere beyond our reach, something ancient still moves. Whether literal or symbolic, the idea remains powerful. Warning is not about predicting the future, but about recognizing continuity. What has happened before can happen again under similar conditions. As you drift closer to sleep, let this thought settle gently. Warnings are not threats. They are invitations to awareness. They ask for patience, observation, and humility. They accept that understanding may arrive too late for one generation, but not for all. In the end, traveller, it's all right to not understand everything at once. Some warnings unfold slowly across centuries. Tonight the universe whispers again, not to frighten you, but to remind you that attention itself is a form of care. The sky is the oldest archive humanity has ever consulted. Long before stone, clay, or language patterns above guided movement, timing, and survival. The Sumerians understood this not romantically but practically. For them, the sky was not decoration. It was infrastructure. It was a living system whose movements encoded information far more stable than any human institution could ever be. Night after night, generations of astronomer priests climbed the ziggurats and looked upward. They did not search for beauty, they searched for consistency. Which stars rose where? Which planets wandered against the fixed background? Which lights returned on schedule and which deviated? Their task was not to interpret emotion, but to maintain alignment between Earth and a universe that moved according to rules older than memory. I imagine those nights often. The air cooling after desert heat. Lamps dimmed to preserve dark vision. Clay tablets laid out carefully beside measuring cords and sighting tools. The quiet discipline of watching without expectation, knowing that most nights would reveal nothing new, yet understanding that missing a single anomaly could matter profoundly. This patience is a form of reverence modern culture has largely forgotten. The Sumerians mapped the sky with a precision that still unsettles historians. They identified the 5 visible planets and tracked their retrograde motion. They divided the ecliptic into segments that later became the zodiac. They understood eclipses as predictable events rather than random omens. None of this required divine intervention to explain, yet they connected these observations intimately with divine administration. To them, celestial bodies were not symbols, they were markers. Each planet corresponded to an Anunnaki figure not because of superstition, but because those beings were believed to operate through celestial cycles. Watching Jupiter was watching Marduk's domain. Tracking Venus was tracking Inanna's influence. The sky became a dashboard displaying the status of forces governing Earth. What makes this extraordinary is the scale of time involved. Some cycles the Sumerians tracked extend beyond recorded history. Precession. The slow wobble of Earth's axis unfolds over nearly 26,000 years. No single civilization should have been able to identify it conclusively. Yet traces of this knowledge appear embedded in their age systems and mythic chronology. Whether this understanding emerged from painstaking generational record-keeping or inherited knowledge is less important than its presence. The Sumerians acted as if the sky carried long-term schedules. They believed that when certain configurations returned, conditions on Earth would also change. This belief shaped everything from ritual calendars to political legitimacy. The sky also offered neutrality. Empires rose and fell beneath it, but the stars remained indifferent. In a land prone to floods and conquest, this stability mattered. The heavens did not lie. They could be trusted when kings could not. Observing the sky was an act of grounding reality beyond human chaos. In modern science, we share this impulse. Satellites monitor atmospheric change. Telescopes track near-Earth objects. Space becomes a reference frame against which terrestrial uncertainty is measured. The language has changed, but the instinct is the same. When Earth feels unstable, look outward. The Sumerians integrated sky and Earth seamlessly. Ziggurats were aligned to cardinal directions. Temple stages corresponded to planetary associations. Ascending a ziggurat was not symbolic pilgrimage alone, but reenactment of cosmic order. Each level represented a celestial layer. The summit marked the interface where sky and ground could meet. This architecture implies expectation. Structures were built not just to honor gods, but to receive them. The sky was not distant. It was accessible under the right conditions. Descent mattered more than ascent. The gods came down, humans prepared. Astronomical texts preserved alongside rituals suggest coordinated monitoring. When certain stars rose, heliacally rituals were adjusted. When eclipses occurred, protocols were enacted. These responses were not reactive panic, but rehearsed procedures. The sky did not surprise them, it informed them. I have spent nights under modern skies watching satellites glide silently past stars, realizing how much our perception has changed. The heavens now feel crowded, mechanical, mapped, yet the underlying motions remain ancient. The same planets follow the same paths. The same cycles continue indifferent to our narratives. The Sumerians believed the sky marked returns, that when long cycles completed conditions allowed contact to resume. Whether this meant literal beings or metaphorical phases, the implication is the same. Time is not linear progress, but circulation. What leaves can come back when the path realigns. This idea is uncomfortable for modern thinking, which favours novelty over recurrence. Yet geology, climate science, and astronomy all confirm cyclicity. Ice ages return, magnetic poles reverse, supernovae recur in galactic neighbourhoods. The universe itself breathes in patterns. The sky also teaches humility. Human timescales are brief. Civilizations occupy moments. Against orbital mechanics, even empires are flickers. The Sumerians accepted this. Their texts rarely boast permanence. Instead, they emphasize maintenance, hold the line, keep the records, watch the signs. They knew absence did not mean abandonment. The sky still moved according to schedule. The gods' withdrawal did not erase the cycles, it only shifted responsibility. Humans became watchers rather than participants, custodians rather than subjects. As you listen now, observer, you are under that same sky. Different lights, different names, but identical mechanics. Satellites replace wandering gods. Telescopes replace naked eyes. Data replaces myth. Yet the act of watching remains unchanged. There is calm in this continuity. The sky does not rush. It does not demand interpretation. It offers pattern and waits. Whether we assign meaning or not, it continues its motion. This patience is instructive. Tonight as sleep approaches, let the sky above you exist without explanation. It does not need belief to function. It does not need fear to matter. It simply moves, carrying memory and light that left its source long before humanity learned to write. In the end, traveller, it's all right to not understand what the sky signifies. It has always been larger than interpretation. Some mysteries wait, others watch. And above all, the sky remembers even when we forget. Earth remembers differently than the sky. The heavens preserve motion. The ground preserves impact. Where stars repeat, the land accumulates. Every flood leaves a layer. Every fire leaves ash. Every city leaves a shadow pressed into soil. The Sumerians lived inside this memory even if they did not name it that way. Their world was not only written on clay tablets, but on riverbanks, deltas, and buried foundations stacked one atop another like thoughts, sedimenting over time. Southern Mesopotamia was never stable ground. The Tigris and Euphrates shifted their courses unpredictably. Floods came without warning, fields turned to marsh, then to dust. Entire cities were swallowed slowly, not by violence, but by accumulation. This instability shaped how the Sumerians understood existence. Nothing solid lasted, only systems did. Only maintenance delayed erasure. Archaeology confirms this fragility. Excavations reveal cities built atop older cities, sometimes dozens of layers deep. Each rebuild followed familiar patterns as if memory guided hands, even when names were forgotten. Streets aligned to older streets. Temples rose on the same sacred points. Earth itself became an archive of repetition. Collapse was expected. Reconstruction was normal. The Sumerians did not interpret disasters as random cruelty. Floods were not surprises. They were part of Earth's rhythm. What mattered was scale and timing. A manageable flood nourished crops. An unmanageable one erased everything. The difference lay not in morality, but in thresholds. This is how Earth warns, not through intention, but through accumulation reaching a breaking point. Their flood myths are grounded in lived experience. The land had drowned before, it would drown again. What elevated these narratives was not the event itself, but the decision-making surrounding it. The Anunnaki Council debates population noise disruption. These are not supernatural complaints, they are system-level concerns. Earth was under stress. Intervention followed. I have studied sediment cores where entire centuries vanish beneath a sudden layer of silt. No inscription explains it. No tablet records panic, but the ground remembers. Earth does not preserve stories, it preserves outcomes. The Sumerians bridged this gap by recording memory alongside material evidence. They tried to give Earth a voice. Temples anchored this dialogue. Built on raised platforms, they stood above flood levels. Their foundations were carefully prepared, reinforced, drained. Earth was treated as an active participant, not a passive surface. Construction required negotiation with soil, water, and gravity. Ritual and engineering were inseparable. Foundation deposits reveal this mindset clearly. Objects were buried intentionally beneath corners and thresholds. These were not offerings to abstract divinity alone. They were messages to the future sealed where Earth would protect them. Clay, metal, and stone were chosen for durability. Knowledge was entrusted to the ground. Earth also shaped their understanding of human origin. Humans were formed from clay mixed with divine essence. This was not metaphorical humility. It was observation. Bodies returned to soil. Bricks came from mud. Cities dissolved back into earth when abandoned. Human existence was a temporary arrangement of matter borrowed from the ground. The Sumerians' obsession with irrigation reflects this intimacy. Water was not just resource, it was threat. Channels required constant maintenance. Neglect led to salinization, crop failure, abandonment. Earth punished inattention quietly. No sudden catastrophe, just gradual decline until survival became impossible. This slow feedback loop demanded vigilance. Priests tracked not only stars but soil conditions. Administrative tablets record crop yields, canal repairs, water levels. Earth was monitored like a system that could fail without notice. Their civilization depended on reading subtle signs before collapse became irreversible. Modern environmental science echoes this awareness. Desertification, erosion, groundwater depletion. None announced themselves dramatically at first. They emerged slowly visible only to those watching closely. The Sumerians understood this intuitively. Their myths encode environmental intelligence in narrative form. The Anunnaki in this light represent governance layered atop ecology. They manage Earth systems, allocate labour, enforce limits. When humans multiply beyond Earth's capacity, correction occurs. This is not divine wrath. It is systems management. The Earth sets constraints. Authority responds. What unsettles modern readers is the acceptance of reset. The Sumerians did not assume continuity. Floods reset civilization. Dynasties reset legitimacy. Even gods withdraw. Earth outlasts all of it. The lesson is not despair, but realism. Permanence is illusion. Adaptation is survival. I've walked across ancient tells where potsherds crunch beneath each step. Broken tools, fragments of daily life compressed into dust. Earth does not care what was sacred. It absorbs everything equally. This impartiality shaped Sumerian humility. They did not believe humanity stood above nature. They believed humanity operated within it. Ziggurats rise like artificial mountains because natural high ground was rare. Elevation meant safety. It meant continuity during floods. The choice was practical, not symbolic. Earth dictated architecture. Stone was scarce. Mud brick dominated. Everything returned to Earth eventually. Even divine dwellings were temporary. Temples required rebuilding. Shrines were renovated repeatedly. There was no assumption of eternal structure. Maintenance was worship. Repair was devotion. Earth demanded attention or reclaimed its materials. The Abzu concept reflects this tension, a subterranean source of water knowledge and creation. Whether literal or symbolic, it acknowledges Earth's depth as something powerful and inaccessible. Humans interacted only with the surface. Beneath lay forces beyond control. Fresh water emerged mysteriously. Springs fed rivers. Earth provided but did not explain itself. Archaeologists never found the Abzu physically, but they did find complex drainage systems, canals, and water management infrastructure. Earth was engineered carefully. Knowledge of hydrology was advanced. The Abzu may have been less a place than a recognition of Earth's hidden systems sustaining life. Earth also preserves absence. Where cities vanished, nothing marks their end except silence. The Sumerians anticipated this. They recorded names, reigns, events precisely because Earth would erase them. Writing became resistance to oblivion. Tonight, listener, consider the ground beneath you. It holds countless histories you will never know. It remembers every step ever taken there, even if no mark remains visible. Earth's memory is patient and complete but indifferent. In this story, Earth is neither villain nor saviour. It is context. It sets boundaries. It responds to stress. It recycles matter relentlessly. Civilizations exist briefly within its long rhythm. The Sumerians understood this. Their warnings were not cosmic alone. They were terrestrial. As you drift towards sleep, let Earth's weight ground you gently. You are supported by layers of time, by soil, shaped by forces older than language. You do not need to conquer this understanding. You already belong to it. In the end, traveller, it's all right to not understand Earth fully. It does not ask for comprehension, only respect. Some mysteries wait. Others erode quietly. And Earth, always patient, holds them all. Return is never announced with trumpets. It begins as alignment, as conditions quietly resembling something that existed before. In the Sumerian imagination, return was not invasion or salvation. It was recurrence, a phase in a cycle completing itself with indifference to whether anyone was ready. The Anunnaki did not promise to come back out of mercy or anger. They returned because the pattern allowed it. The texts are careful here. They do not describe a dramatic reappearance. They describe appointed times, gates opening, boundaries thinning, heaven and earth becoming permeable again under specific conditions. Return is procedural, not emotional. It follows timing, not desire. This is why the Sumerians watched the sky so closely. Return was written in motion, not in prophecy. I have often thought about return while examining long data sets. Climate oscillations that vanish for centuries, then re-emerge. Magnetic reversals that leave no warning until they are already underway. Species thought extinct that reappear when environments shift back into familiar ranges. Return is rarely reversal. It is reoccupation of possibility. In the Sumerian worldview, the gods did not vanish forever. They withdrew. Withdrawal implies intention, and the possibility of reversal. The language used is precise. Gates were closed. Paths were sealed. Communication required effort. Ritual complexity increased over time because access diminished. This suggests not disappearance, but distance. Return then was conditional. Not everyone would experience it. Only those maintaining the systems, the records, the observatories, the protocols. The temples functioned as outposts left operational during absence. Their continued maintenance was not faith alone. It was compliance with instruction. The Anunnaki texts repeatedly emphasize readiness. Keep the chambers furnished. Keep the rituals exact. Keep the calendars accurate. Watch the signs. Return was not something to summon prematurely. It was something to be met properly when it arrived. Improper timing was dangerous. This is a subtle but consistent warning. Modern readers often imagine return as spectacle. Ships descending. Beings appearing openly. But the Sumerian material suggests something quieter. Administrators resuming oversight, evaluators checking records, a presence felt through correction rather than display, return as audit rather than arrival. This framing changes the emotional tone entirely. Fear becomes unnecessary, awe becomes secondary, responsibility becomes central. Humanity is not a passive subject awaiting rescue or punishment. It is a caretaker awaiting review. The anxiety is not about survival, but about adequacy. Return also interacts with memory. What happens when those being evaluated no longer remember the original instructions? The Sumerians anticipated this problem. They preserved texts even when their meaning faded. They copied rituals long after context was lost. They trusted that accuracy mattered more than understanding. I see parallels in modern engineering. Systems outlast designers. Operators follow procedures they did not invent. Documentation becomes sacred. When something fails, recovery depends on whether records were maintained correctly. The Sumerians treated civilization this way. Return in this sense is not cosmic judgment, it is systems verification. Are the channels maintained? Are the cycles tracked? Are the limits respected? Have the hybrid bloodlines preserved coherence? Have the me been stewarded or squandered? These questions are implicit throughout the texts. The notion of genetic dilution fits this framework. Early kings possess longer lifespans, later kings do not. The decline is gradual, measurable, and accepted. Return would reveal whether dilution was expected or problematic. The texts do not say, they simply preserve the data. Return is also linked to silence. Long periods pass with no direct interaction. During this time, humanity develops autonomy. Cities expand, technologies evolve, beliefs shift. Return does not restore the past. It encounters something new. This encounter carries uncertainty. I imagine the Sumerian priests wrestling with this quietly. Would return mean correction or adjustment? Would it mean reclamation or reinforcement? They did not know. They only knew that return was part of the cycle, and cycles do not consult those within them. There is humility in this acceptance. No attempt to control return, no effort to accelerate it, only preparation and patience. The Sumerians did not believe they could force the heavens open indefinitely. They believed timing mattered more than will. Modern culture struggles with this idea. We assume progress eliminates return. That advancement breaks cycles, yet history suggests otherwise. Economic booms return. Political patterns recur. Technologies revive old ethical questions. Even myths return under new names. In astronomy, return is fundamental. Comets vanish into deep space and reappear centuries later. Their return is predictable yet startling. Each time they look new, even though they are ancient. The sky teaches that absence is not erasure. The Sumerians understood return as layered. Not everything returns at once. Some aspects reappear symbolically before materially. Rituals precede presence. Signs precede events. This staging allowed for adjustment. Those paying attention could respond early. I think of nights spent waiting for predicted transits telescopes aimed at empty sky for hours. Most nights yield nothing. Then briefly a shadow crosses a star. The event is subtle, easily missed, yet it confirms alignment across vast distances. Return works like this. The texts never specify what return would look like in sensory terms. This omission is deliberate. They focus on preparation rather than spectacle. Return is less about what appears than about what is revealed. Systems show their integrity under renewed oversight. As you listen now, traveller, consider how return manifests in your own life. Habits resurface under stress. Old questions reappear when conditions align. Lessons ignored once return with greater consequence later. Return is not punishment. It is reminder. The Sumerians believed their age was not the last. They did not expect finality. They expected continuation under altered conditions. Return was part of maintenance, not conclusion. Even gods were subject to cycles. This perspective removes urgency and replaces it with endurance. If return is inevitable, panic is pointless. Preparation is sufficient. Sleep becomes appropriate. Anxiety wastes energy needed for vigilance. Tonight as rest approaches, imagine return not as threat but as convergence. Sky aligning with ground. Memory aligning with present. Patterns completing arcs too large to perceive fully. You're not required to witness the return itself. In the end, traveller, it's all right to not know how or when return occurs. The Sumerians did not claim certainty. They claimed continuity. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, only observed. Some returns happen quietly without announcement. Sleep now. Somewhere beyond our reach, something ancient still moves, and whether it returns or not, the cycle continues, carrying you gently within it. Reflection begins not with answers, but with stillness. After reading the tablets, after tracing the constellations, after following the long arc of stories about gods who came, Taught withdrew, and promised to return. What remains is not certainty, but wait. A sense that something vast passed through human history and left impressions that time could not erase, only soften. Reflection is the moment when the mind stops chasing conclusions and allows patterns to settle on their own. In quiet laboratories and dim archive rooms, I have learned that reflection is a necessary phase of understanding. Data alone does not speak. It accumulates weight and only later reveals shape. The Sumerians seem to understand this instinctively. They did not rush to explain everything. They recorded, copied, preserved, and accepted that meaning might belong to another age, another set of eyes. Their texts are full of pauses disguised as repetition, king lists that stretch impossibly long, astronomical tables copied word for word across centuries, rituals maintained long after their original context faded. These are not signs of stagnation. They are signs of restraint, reflection embedded into culture. What strikes me most is their comfort with partial knowledge. They knew pieces were missing. Scribes openly noted when tablets were broken or sources unclear. They did not attempt to invent what was lost. They marked absence honestly. In a world that worships completion, this humility feels foreign. Reflection in this sense is ethical. It respects the boundary between what can be known and what must be held gently. The Sumerians did not flatten mystery into metaphor simply to make it manageable. They allowed gods to remain unsettling technologies, to remain ambiguous cycles, to remain longer than any single life. As modern observers, we inherit this tension. Our instruments are precise, our simulations powerful, yet the deeper questions remain resistant. Consciousness, origin, purpose, recurrence. We circle them with new language, but the center stays quiet. Reflection teaches patience here. I think of erosion as a form of reflection. Stone does not decide how to change. It responds slowly to wind water temperature. Over time, sharp edges soften into curves. Information behaves similarly. Initial interpretations erode. What remains is structure. The Sumerian record has been eroding for 5,000 years, yet something coherent persists. That persistence suggests intention. Not deception, not fantasy, but deliberate memory. Whether the Anunnaki were gods' visitors or symbolic frameworks for understanding power and knowledge, the fact that they were treated consistently across texts, art architecture, and administration matters. Reflection asks us to honor that consistency without forcing it into modern categories. I often return to the image of astronomer priests watching the sky night after night, recording tiny shifts that no single generation could fully confirm. They worked knowing they would never see the cycle complete. Reflection requires this kind of patience, investment without personal payoff. Our era struggles with that discipline. We demand results within lifetimes, explanations within abstracts. Yet the deepest processes move on timescales that dwarf us. Precession, climate cycles, cultural memory. Reflection is learning to think at those scales without becoming lost. There is also a quiet sorrow in reflection. If the Sumerians were caretakers awaiting return, then much of their labour was performed in absence. They maintained empty chambers. They prepared offerings for visitors who did not arrive. They watched skies that remained silent. This is devotion stripped of reward. And yet they continued, not out of blind faith but out of adherence to pattern. Reflection reveals that meaning does not require fulfillment, it requires alignment. They aligned their actions with a structure they believed larger than themselves. That belief sustained continuity even as certainty faded. Modern science shares this ethic more than we admit. We run experiments whose results may only be meaningful decades later. We build observatories knowing discoveries may come after retirement or death. Reflection binds ancient ritual and modern research together. As a listener, you're now part of this chain. Not because you believe any single interpretation, but because you are willing to sit with uncertainty, to let ancient voices speak without demanding they resolve into comfort. Reflection is an act of respect across time. In these stories, return may or may not be literal. The warning may or may not apply to our age, but the posture the Sumerians modelled remains relevant. Watch carefully. Record honestly. Maintain what you inherit. Do not assume absence means irrelevance. Reflection also softens fear. When you see yourself as a brief moment within long cycles, anxiety loses its edge. You are not responsible for the entire arc, only for your segment of attention. The rest unfolds without your supervision. I find peace in this thought late at night, surrounded by quiet machines and blinking indicators. The universe does not rush. Neither did the Sumerians. They trusted time more than impulse. Reflection is learning to do the same. As you drift towards sleep, allow the questions to remain open. You do not need to solve them. You are not meant to. Some mysteries wait, others watch. Tonight the universe whispers again, not with answers, but with continuity. In the end, traveller, it's all right to not understand. Reflection is not weakness. It is the final discipline of those who take the unknown seriously. Sleep now and let the long patterns carry you gently onward. The descent does not begin with darkness. It begins with release. After the long journey through tablets, skies, ruins, and warnings, the mind slowly loosens its grip on explanation. Like a spacecraft shutting down instruments one by one, awareness dims gently, deliberately, without urgency. This is how sleep approaches when it is invited, not forced. Imagine the night settling over an ancient city. The fires in the courtyards burn low. The ziggurats stand silent against the stars. No rituals are being performed now. No priests are watching the sky. Only stone dust and quiet remain. The world continues, but without demand. This is the state the Sumerians seem to respect deeply, the pause between observation and meaning. Descent is a movement inward rather than forward. The questions you've carried begin to feel heavier, not with pressure, but with gravity, like objects finding their natural resting place. Gravity, after all, is memory made physical. It remembers where matter belongs. Sleep works the same way. It guides thoughts back to their origin where effort dissolves. In my own nights surrounded by maps and instruments, I've learned that insight rarely arrives when pursued. It comes when the mind drifts, when attention softens. The Sumerian scribes knew this rhythm. Their tablets were not frantic messages. They were calm deposits pressed slowly into clay left to harden under time itself. They trusted future minds to meet them halfway. As you listen now, your breathing finds its own pace. The body recognizes this moment as familiar. Long before words, before stories of gods or visitors, sleep was humanity's first teacher. It showed us how to let go safely, how to surrender control without vanishing, how to be small without fear. The cosmos mirrors this descent. Stars do not blaze constantly. They pulse, rest, collapse, reform. Even light knows when to fade. The universe is not a machine that demands attention at all times. It allows intervals. Silence is not absence. Silence is the universe thinking. Picture the ancient sky once more. The same planets still move. The same slow wobble of Earth continues. Nothing you've heard tonight has altered that motion. Nothing you need to do will interrupt it. This realization is not bleak. It is comforting. You're not responsible for holding the cosmos together. Descent into sleep is accepting that truth fully. You can release vigilance. You can stop watching for return signs alignments. If something ancient still moves beyond our reach, it does so without your supervision. And if nothing does, the stars remain just as steady. The stories you've heard were preserved because they mattered to those who came before. But they do not require you to stay awake. Understanding is not a prerequisite for rest. The Sumerians built monuments to endure long after their builders slept. Continuity does not depend on consciousness. Your thoughts may now blur at the edges. Images soften, tablets turn to dust. Stars stretch into gentle arcs. This is not loss, it is transition. Like erosion smoothing stone, sleep smooths awareness. Sharp questions become rounded impressions. What remains is calm. In this descent there is no cliff, no sudden drop. Only gradual sinking, like settling into deep water that holds you effortlessly. The mind floats, the body follows. Even curiosity grows quiet, satisfied simply to exist. As the final, wakeful thoughts drift away, remember this. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, only observed. Observation has ended for now. The instruments power down. The watch ends for the night. Sleep, traveller. The cosmos will keep watch. Final does not mean ending. It means settling. After the long arc of warning memory and sky, the mind arrives at a quiet shoreline where nothing needs to be decided. The ancient story loosens its grip not because it was unimportant, but because it has done its work. What remains is calm awareness, like embers after a fire warm without urgency. Across millennia, civilizations have risen, believing they stood at the center of time. The Sumerians did not. They placed themselves inside cycles that dwarfed them, accepted that arrival and departure were phases, not finales. In that humility there is wisdom. Modern minds are relearning slowly, sometimes painfully. History breathes. It expands, contracts, forgets, and remembers again. Tonight you've listened to echoes shaped by claystone and starlight. You've followed questions without demanding answers. That alone is enough. Curiosity does not require resolution to be meaningful. The universe does not reward certainty. It responds to attention. When attention rests, the cosmos rests with it. I imagine the last scribe finishing a tablet, smoothing the clay, setting it aside without knowing who would read it. That gesture carries trust. Trust that someone somewhere would be quiet enough to listen. In that sense, this moment completes a circuit across time, not with revelation, but with presence. If the Anunnaki were real, they are no longer needed tonight. If they were symbolic, the symbols have done their work. Either way, the message softens into something simpler. Observe carefully, act gently, and accept that not all knowledge arrives on schedule. Some truths orbit slowly. As sleep deepens, even that message can fade. Meaning does not vanish when forgotten. It waits like constellations, hidden by daylight, unchanged by our attention. Tomorrow questions may return. They always do. But for now they can rest. The ancient world is not watching you. It has already spoken. The future is not demanding readiness. It will arrive when it does. Between them there is this quiet interval where nothing is required. This interval is a gift humans rarely give themselves. Let the mind settle into that gift. Let thoughts thin out like mist lifting from a river at dawn. You do not need to carry the weight of history into sleep. Time is strong enough to hold itself. In laboratories and ruins alike, I've learned the same lesson. Endurance belongs to what moves slowly. Panic burns out. Certainty fractures. But patience persists. The Sumerians practiced patience on a civilizational scale. Tonight, you practice it for a few gentle hours. As consciousness dims, remember this softly, some mysteries wait. Others watch, most simply exist indifferent to fear or hope. That indifference is not cold, it is spacious, it leaves room for rest. Final moments are not conclusions, they are thresholds. Crossing them requires no effort, only release. The story does not end here. It quiets like a tide pulling back under moonlight. Sleep now, traveller. The long night will pass as it always has, carrying stars' memories and unanswered questions forward without strain. When you wake, the universe will still be here, vast and patient, thinking in silence. Nothing asks you to believe, to agree, or to prepare. Belief is heavier than rest. Agreement tightens the mind. Preparation belongs to waking hours. Sleep asks only permission. Permission to drift, to be unguarded, to let ancient narratives dissolve into texture rather than instruction. In that softness, the nervous system remembers safety older than language, older than stories of gods or visitors, older even than names for stars. You may notice the body's sinking limbs, warm breath slower, thoughts less linear. This is not disappearance, it is alignment. Like a planet settling into orbit, effort gives way to balance. The night does not erase you, it restores proportion. You're small, yes, but safely so held within structures unimaginably large yet strangely gentle. Nothing you forget tonight will be lost forever. Memory returns when needed, and until then silence is enough. Let that be the final thought, fading gently. No task remains, no signal requires response. The dark is friendly, the quiet is complete. Rest unfolds, naturally carrying you forward without effort, without demand, into the steady rhythm of sleep tonight, softly. We've reached the edge of tonight's journey, traveller, where the lantern light softens and the chamber grows quiet again. The ruins fade back into shadow, the tablets return to their silence, and the sky resumes its slow, patient turning above us. What we've traced together does not conclude here, it simply settles like dust after a careful step. The universe continues whether we watch or not. The past remains unfinished, its questions resting in clay and stone in orbits, and intervals too long for a single life to hold. Some truths do not demand answers, only presence. Gravity remembers where things belong. Time remembers without hurry. And silence at last does its quiet work. If the Anunnaki were God's visitors, or the language of an ancient mind reaching for understanding, their story still breathes in the margins. Not as certainty, but as wonder. Not as fear, but as humility. We are small here, and that smallness is gentle a place to rest. So let the book close softly. Let the stars keep their watch. You may drift now, observer, between memory and sleep, between what was and what may return. Rest well. Stay curious. The universe will keep watch.